Hi, this is Austin Wintory, and this is the Game Maker's Notebook. Talking today with Tom Salta, who is a fabulous composer who just recently shipped Deathloop, but has had a really, really eclectic career up to this point and a whole alternate life as a record producer and a guy who played in bands. And we unpack all of that, and he kind of walks me through the amazing steps of his journey that led to today and the kind of beautiful full circle, no pun intended, that Deathloop represented. And just an all around engaging, passionate guy and a real joy to talk to. And I hope you enjoy listening. I am joined by Atlas Plug, aka Tom, formerly known as Tom, now under the permanent moniker, something along those lines. I wanted to actually start straight in with that because a lot of folks have been very single-minded in their careers of this sort of, I'm pursuing this one thing, and maybe they get into it laterally through something else, but you seem to wear a few different hats, or at least have at various times. And I think that's one of several reasons that you're kind of an interesting outlier. You also live in a very different part of the country from seemingly all the rest of us. Yes. And so I just wanted to, I got all kinds of questions about Deathloop and all kinds of things, but why don't you start us there? Because the whole kind of electronic artist and record producing and all that is, I think, is an interesting jumping off point that leads into games, if I may put that forward.
You may. Austin, it's a pleasure to be here with you.
It's nice to turn the tide since last time you invited me into a thing.
That's right.
So
that's
now
right.
I'm just getting payback.
Yeah, well, please.
I've kept a quiet tally of all my grievances from that experience that I'll be using against you today.
Here they come. All right, then. So
yes, take it away.
You're referring to a pivotal moment in my career, which happened 15 years after I was already a music professional in the record business. So, and you're referring to the whole Atlas Club phenom, which was in 2003, which served as a sort of a bridge for me between traditional record business stuff. I came from being a songwriter, record producer, going on tour in the early 90s with Bobby Brown and Whitney Houston. And, you know, coming from that whole record business, my goal in high school was to be a big famous record producer, right? Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. That was my world. I was making records, remixes and everything, like a Forrest Gump kind of career. I can make you laugh with all the experiences and people I've worked with up until 2001. Where I had this sense, once Britney Spears came on the scene, I'm just trying to think of certain artists, where I felt there's the record industry kind of reached this peak, and it was starting to do this because of this whole high-speed internet phenomenon and Napster, LimeWire. People started downloading music for free. And myself included, it was easier to get a hold of a track you like just by going to LimeWire and downloading it. And then it took a genius like Steve Jobs to make it easier to buy music than to steal it. And that was the creation.
You felt that change in the wind pretty immediately.
Right. Really early. And so
I feel like there's people in the record industry that are still grappling with this. So good on you that you felt the wins pretty fast.
So right at the same time as that door, I started to see that door closing, and it was very terrifying for me because I hate to age myself, but I was 30 years old when this happened, and I was already married. I had a mortgage. I had one child already, and I'm like, wait a second, what happened to the big famous record producer career I wanted to have? I don't see that working realistically right now. And I'm feeling very creatively restricted stylistically. I was always the guy, and you mentioned the word outlier, and I'm so glad you did, because I've come to the acceptance that I am a true outlier in almost every way, particularly in professional circles. And I always felt myself as an outlier, even in record business stuff, because I was the guy who always wanted to throw a French horn or a string section into a pop song. I was the guy who wanted to
Riddle.
And it was tough. And that's why, you know, I always gravitated toward artists like Peter Gabriel and, you know, even Pink Floyd, the artists that seemed to create things that were more visual, that would draw you in. And I don't think it should be surprising that, you know, like someone like Peter Gabriel got called in to do, you know, a score to a movie. I think it was The Last Temptation of Christ. And even that score was so different than everything else.
100%.
You know, so that's where my head is at. I've always been that kind of an artist, or at least that mind space. I love music that would take me to another world, take me out of reality and pull me somewhere else. You see where this is leading, Austin. 2001, Xbox came out, Halo came out. I was playing Prince of Persia, the Sands of Time. I was playing Rainbow Six. You have brilliant composers. You have Bill Brown. You have Marty O'Donnell. And I started hearing for the first time in my life music from Western-made video games that resonated with what I wanted to do. I'm like, I love Mario. I mean, I've been playing games since the 70s, but when I heard that music, I'm like, that's what I want to do. And it's like, that's the future for me. But again, where do I start? I'm now 30 plus, had a record industry thing behind me, but no one cared when I went to E3 that I worked on the Cher album. It's like, who cares? So I'm basically Johnny wannabe composer with no conservatory training, right? So like, where do I even start? So that's where I kind of went home with my tail between my legs and came up with this crazy idea that the only way I could come on a scene at a high level and take that experience with me is to go as an artist. But I wasn't an artist, even though I knew exactly how to make a record from scratch for anybody. I knew the whole process. I had my own studio. I could mix, I could produce, I could arrange, I could master, I could do it all myself. So I came up with this desperate idea to create an album of music that would be perfectly suited for licensing in film, TV, and games, where I could kind of come through the licensing side. And then once I established myself, I kind of take off the mask of this Atlas plug and say, hey, I'm Tom Salta. I'd love to score your game.
The call came from inside the house.
So that's really the story behind the story of how I started. And
it's a bold move.
It was a bold yet desperate move. And it was an outlier move that I just had no other choice. You know, I didn't have a fallback. There was no plan B. And I see that common factor with a lot of people who kind of make it, so to speak, is that there is no fallback. It's either do or die. And that's why I named my album 2 Days or Die, because I had to make it fast. I had to do it quick. And if it didn't work, I'm screwed. And,
are you familiar with David Arnold's James Bond sort of remix album that he did, Shaken and Stirred, in the mid-90s? Because this was, I always thought that this was presumably a similar gambit he was making, because this was, I think, what essentially led to him landing the job on Tomorrow Never Dies and then becoming the de facto Bond composer for the next 10 years or so, because he had done a few hit movies, but I think this is what he wanted. So he just put on this record producer hat and made this thing where he's taking like Shirley Bassey and remixing it all and made these incredible updated versions. It's one of the only examples, even remotely along the lines of what you're talking about, that I can think of where somebody sort of devised an alternate strategy than the generic, you know, go to GDC and meet audio directors or whatever the typical stories were.
Yeah.
The thing that I'm curious about is what made you even think that the game industry would value a record like this? Because to me, that's the kind of magical, crazy insight, because I don't see, even still to this day, and even with you as somebody who managed to pull this off successfully, I still don't see this strategy particularly commonly. I can't think of anybody else where they released some record under a kind of guise, and then it got licensed or whatever, and then they kind of pivoted in. I mean, there's a few.
Yeah.
I mean, like Phineas, you know, the half of the Billie Eilish, her brother, he just scored his first film, and he's been like Phineas record producer up to this point. But that's obviously not quite the same thing. I don't think that the Billie Eilish stuff was a means to an end to get into film scoring in any case with him. So yeah, I'm just curious to unpack this a little bit more in terms of what made you think this would even work.
Yeah. I know. I think what made me think it could work is that when I played games that were like driving games and sports games, I heard a lot of this high adrenaline kind of, you know, Crystal Method kind of music, you know, Chemical Brothers. And I'm like, well, I could do that. I can do Prodigy, you know, I could be that artist. So that's what really kind of gave me a sense that it was possible to do it, because those are the kind of games that would license music instead of score it, you know, which ironically is funny because it led to EA and Charles Deanan calling me after hearing Atlas Plug to score Need for Speed Underground 2. So that was kind of like an interesting bridge because there were cutscenes in it, and so he had me score it under the style of an Atlas Plug, but it was a driving game anyway, which had licensed music in it.
Right, yeah.
So, I don't know, but that was really it, Austin. It wasn't really,
yeah.
You're right. I mean, it was so scary, and it was like I didn't have a precedence for this before. You know,
yeah, or since. I mean, it's really, you know, there's just so few. I mean, even the idea of like somebody who establishes themselves as like a classical composer or something, there's just so, I just really can't think of any example. So it's an amazing swing, and the fact that it worked is wild. Zooming backward just a minute, because something that you said, I feel like we've talked about this before, but I can't quite remember the particulars. But just going back to kind of earlier in life, when you said that you were the weird producer who wanted to be adding horns and strings, and kind of your production instincts tilted things towards the, you know, dare I say, cinematic, which is a kind of a generic term that doesn't necessarily mean anything specific, but I think it's probably a fair word to use here. That was sort of where you're
on screen, good to picture in some way.
Yeah, and there's like, you know, maybe orchestral instruments find their way in a little more easily than they might otherwise, that sort of thing. Where did that instinct, you think, come from? Like, what was your childhood that sort of laid the seeds of that sort of thing?
Yeah, definitely some of my earliest memories. I still have two much older brothers. And so they were listening when I was just, you know, 3-4 years old, waddling around. These guys are in their late teens listening to.
Oh, that is a big age difference.
Yeah. So like Pink Floyd and a lot of the, you know, some of the psychedelic rock stuff. But the Pink Floyd stuff is really, I remember that sticking out. I remember Jethro Tull. I remember Led Zeppelin. I remember one of my brothers was into Jean-Luc Ponty, who's an incredible French electric violinist. So a lot of eclectic music. Geez, what else? Gosh.
But all those have in common that they're very, like, they showcase a lot of very imaginative, very colorful, you know, and all of those everyone you just named was kind of on the vanguard of like pushing whatever genre into something new, like Jethro Tull being one of the most famous, literally the first ever metal Grammy winners. Like, but you know, by pushing things somewhere, they were hard to pinpoint, which I guess does lend itself to the kind of eclecticism of this job. So,
I remember.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Patrick O'Hearn. I remember I listened to Patrick O'Hearn. I remember, here's a key moment. Right after I finished, I studied classical music and piano with my mother, actually. She was my teacher from 5 years old. And so it was part of growing up. And right when I transitioned in the summer of 8th grade and got a synthesizer, I begged my father for a synthesizer because I went to a friend's house and pushed this key down and I heard this amazing sound that came out of it. It wasn't a piano. I'm like, oh my God, this is magical. And then then that kind of took me into areas of synth music, new wave, which is now coming back with a vengeance, called synthwave.
No kidding.
But I remember, artists like Depeche Mode and things like that. But my freshman year talent show, talk about eclectic and an outlier. I opened the talent show and I played, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I played everything from Peter Gunn to Madonna to Patrick O'Hearn to some dance music. I'm sure, like stuff that was, on the radio or whatever. It was like a medley. I play Inspector Gadget, like on I'm trying to think. I think I played some classical. I think I played was it a Mozart?
This was in a talent show?
It was a talent show.
Sounds like you did an hour-long set. Was there anybody else in the talent show?
Medley. It was like a medley. Like I went from one thing to the other, and I pre-recorded some of the backing tracks with my little Tascam Porta 1, which had like a cassette deck. You know what I'm saying? Like, so already I was kind of all over the place, and I just loved music, but a variety of stuff.
At that stage, were you dead set on? I mean, I guess. If not by then shortly thereafter, the goal became, I want to be the next, the next Quincy Jones kind of type. Is that what you have, like when you're sitting there on stage in your talent show medley moment, is that what you would have identified as the goal? Like, was it by that age, like literally, essentially as a teenager, are you going, this is what I'm going to be doing? Or was it kind of an option and you were weighing the realism of it, or kind of where was your head at?
No, there was no realism at all.
I think it's definitely have in common.
You're kidding me? Realism. Oh my God. Yeah. So it was, for me, it was Quincy Jones. I collected the keyboard magazines. I still have some of the early ones. I have an issue with Jam and Lewis on the cover. Mutt Lange, the producer, Trevor Horn, still one of my idols. And you listen to even Trevor Horn's stuff, like, everything from The Art of Noise to Yes, to Frankie Goes to Hollywood, to who he was married to. Oh my God, I'm drawing a blank. The artist, female, tall, black artist, was in James Bond. Come on, help me out.
In James Bond, you mean
early?
Yeah.
Oh God, it just came and went out again.
I'm frantically trying to Google because this was news to me. I never knew.
Oh yeah. Yes. Grace Jones.
Grace Jones.
So yeah, Trevor Horn.
I did not know about that.
Oh yeah. So wow. I mean, he's to talk about being eclectic, and even when you listen to his music, like one of my favorite albums is that Yes album that I can never remember the number, 90215, whatever, that one with Owner of a Lonely Heart on it. And you listen to all the detail of the intricate production and arrangement and all these, and it jumps around to a cappella, and then it comes back to experimenting with samplers and things. So I always gravitated towards being on the cutting edge of the trends of music, but also in this very eclectic, visually oriented music, I guess you would say.
Yeah. So that, I mean, I just love that you were one of those folks. I even though our paths are so different, I definitely can relate to the idea of at a pretty young age getting fixated on a thing and then just essentially manipulating life to try and make sure that you're on that path one way or the other.
Manifesting for sure.
Yeah, and just not and as you said, giving yourself no real fallback, no backup plan, no escape hatch kind of thing, because it's a difficult enough of a career that you'll fall back on it. Like if that becomes the thing that you do when eventually your back's against the wall and you're going, I don't know if I can do this.
Right. That's right. When you get real low in those periods of time and you're like, ugh, man, I could use that steady paycheck right about now, you know, or, you know, that predictability, whatever that is for you. So
100%. Sorry, I'm adjusting my mic.
Sure.
So then jumping back again to your pivot moment into games, one thing I'm curious, sort of, it seems the way you tell the story, it seems like you made this very kind of like binary walk away from the record world. Now I'm fully in games, but is that accurate? Were you, or was there kind of like a crossfade period where you were sort of wearing both hats? And do you still ever, I actually don't know this, if you ever still do like produce or do any of that kind of work separate? Because it seems like you're busy enough in games that it would be hard pressed to find the time. But this is where I just, people always have surprises.
Yes, that was a great question. There was a period of years where I kind of took a hiatus from producing because I really didn't see any end game that was worth doing.
Right.
You know, at this point, I'm like, okay, let me. So I was so excited to be in this brand new swimming pool, this brand new creative freedom. And I was just running around, you know, doing everything from, you know, whatever, Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter to Prince of Persia to Red Steel, you know, talk about eclectic and jumping around all over the map. I was just having a blast. It did kind of come full circle, even in games. Although I have been doing some things outside of games in this realm, which we could talk a little bit about. But even in games, it kind of came a little bit full circle because when this little game called Just Dance came out, it happened to be produced by Microsoft and Ubisoft, pardon me, Ubisoft. And I had a, you know, established great relationship with some people there, and they knew about my background.
Like this is after Prince of Persia.
This is after. So this is probably in the late 2000s, if I had to guess. I know I've been working on it for over a decade now. So it comes around and my friend asks me, he's like, okay, Tom, listen, we need to do some recreations of some pop songs that we can't get the mechanicals to. But we'd also like an original. We'd like some kind of off-the-wall original song. So now, all of a sudden, I'm asked to put my producer and songwriter hat back on. So one of the first things I had to recreate, and it's still out there today, you can hear it, you can go on YouTube, is some of the Britney Spears, ironically. Some of the Britney Spears songs. Hit Me Baby One More Time and Oops, I Did It Again.
So wait, that means they had the rights, they had the kind of abstract
right. They didn't
like usage, like sync rights or whatever.
They had the sync, I believe. Yeah, they had the sync, but not the mechanicals. I believe that's the correct.
It's so bizarre. How would you even get one without the other? Like, why would you? It's so bizarre that they would be granted one without the other by the label, because that forces them to do what you're talking about. You know?
Like, well, it's cheaper, I guess, because if they want to use Britney's voice and the actual recordings of Max Martin, it would have to cost a lot. Right, whereas they're like, knock yourself out. Sure, do your own little cover of it. But to everyone's surprise, I was able to do a cover of it, which is by
you singing, I assume, and hope. It's you.
Of course I'm singing. Good. Hey, baby. So, no, but I actually ended up connecting with Wendy Wagner, who was a background vocalist on the record. And when you hear her sing it and you hear the background vocals, you can kind of hear how it was crafted around Britney's voice. And it was so convincing, not only the vocal performance, which was completely outstanding, but then the production. I mean, I took 6 days to dial in, and I can listen to this stuff because that was my job. When I was on tour at 20 years old, it was my job to listen to Bobby Brown's, all his albums, pick out every sound individually and program them on 5 complete setups of keyboards that I had to pick out and put together. And then every sound had to be assembled for each keyboard player so they can press a button. So I know how to dial in and copy stuff. So when I heard it, I'm like, okay, that hi-hat is from the JV, 1080, and this hat and this orchestral hit and this bass line. So I kind of have this, I don't know, encyclopedic memory when it comes to a lot of the, the synth sounds and how to dial in and pick something out. So I recreated it, and people couldn't even tell the difference. They're like, wait a minute. To the fact where I got a takedown notice.
Really?
Sony. I got a takedown notice from Sony because I had it on my reel out there, and they're like, "Oh, you can't use this." I'm like, "But anyway." So I'm like, "Yeah, okay, I'll take it down." But it was really funny. So it came full circle. So then I did over the years, and still to this day get asked to do recreations of songs. But more and more, I'm now asked by the same company to do originals. So they might say, like, the first one I did was called Dagamba. They wanted an African, like an authentic sounding African dance song. So one of my colleagues,
this is meaning for Just Dance, like just
for Just Dance,
nestled
and
in among
the song is there. You can go on YouTube. It's called Dagamba, and it became this very kind of underground hit in their own little ecosystem. And it was this African song which I was able to get a recording from a colleague of mine who was African royalty, and he was invited into a coming of age ritual and given permission to record the audio of these coming of age rituals for these teenagers. So you have these like things that you might hear a group called Deep Forest record, which I love Deep Forest, by the way, another outlying eclectic group. And I took all these samples of and I created this dance song around it.
You remember what country? You remember what country they were?
I don't know, but the man's name was Kamani Dinazulu, and so he was of royal origin there.
It's amazing. I've never heard this story.
Yeah. So anyway, that was my first original song in a video game. Well, song.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? And then that led to me doing some other crazy fun ones. One of them was really crazy. Another one called Chihuahua. They asked me to do this little cute kawaii Japanese song, pop song about, cutesy, kawaii is that kind of cutesy culture part that came from Japan, Pokemon and what do they call all the little, the cutesy little bubbly stickers and stuff like that.
For sure.
So I was able to put a song together, and I got a work with an artist in New York, and she came over, and I was holding the microphone and kind of just doing some gibberish. And then we kind of worked on it together, and it became such a hit song that Ubisoft made a video for it, and it got licensed on, of all shows, the Ray Donovan show. Ray Donovan, which is that like very serious drama about a hitman. But it had this scene where he's like, his family's at home and his kid's he's playing Just Dance. He's dancing to Chihuahua. And then Ray Donovan comes in and he starts to do it. He's like, what the hell is this?
That's
this is
so funny.
I mean, it was like the crashing of worlds together.
It's a perfect demonstration. One of the things that I love about these chats that has been a real through line across every composer and audio director and even the actors that I've spoken to, no one's career ever moves in a straight line. No one's career is ever, I'm at point A and I want to go to point B, and life is just that simple. It's just absolutely impossible. And I love the extreme, even under this band, because some people are like, oh yeah, I went and was a geothermal engineer for 10 years in the meantime. Like some people just do, their life has whole disparate chapters. I just found out the other day, side note trivia, what's his name? The guitarist from Tool, Adam Jones. He started off working for Stan Winston as a creature shop guy, including he made some of the model animatronic dinosaurs for Jurassic Park. He was before like his band took off, which became Tool. I never knew that. I was like, wow. Not a lot of people have high-level expertise in and it's like Tool of all bands too. Like you got to be a real fucking musician to play in a band like Tool, and with the kind of stuff that they do, and the fact that he also would have essentially that same degree of capability. Anyway, you're kind of mirroring this for me, that you would have these really wild kind of zigzags. How recently was that? Like, does Ubisoft still release
Yes.
stuff? Like, I seem to remember that being one of their secret bestsellers. Like, all the headlines are on the Assassin's Creeds and the Far Cries and what, but Just Dance, I think, is a steady.
That's been a steady paycheck for them forever, and it's still going on. In fact, I just finished some music for it just now.
So funny.
In another version. So it's been ongoing, and it's funny because my PR guy doesn't like me to talk about it either. Because he's like, it confuses people. It's like, wait a second, you can't be taken seriously as a proper composer doing,
God knows my opinion has been just absolutely plummeting through this conversation. So he's definitely, that's Greg, I assume he's spot on in his suspicion over this. Yeah. God forbid people do more than one thing or have multiple talents or
right.
No, I get it. I get his perspective, especially if you're kind of like, trying to get your name in front of people that may not be familiar with it. It can be good to try to funnel them into whatever thing you're trying to talk up. But still, I think it's very impressive.
The guy did PUBG Battlegrounds and doing the silly Chihuahua song or a song about eating candy. It's. I
mean, this is like Gary Scheinman. You remember that video that went super viral with the guy dancing around the world?
Yes. Yes.
Like, it's the same thing where everybody went, wait a minute. The BioShock guy did the Dancing Dude song?
Yes,
and
exactly.
Just blows minds.
And that's also, I knew this would kind of happen to me. And that's why I created Atlas Plug, and I didn't call it Tom Salta, because I was told from when I broke in, and I remember the guy, and I won't repeat his name, but it's one of these people that came in through your career at different times, high level guy at a big company. And he's like, oh yeah, the Atlas Plug, great stuff. You just stick to the electronics, And then 10 years later, I had established a reputation. I didn't do another Atlas Plug record 10 years later. And I kind of came back, and he saw me again doing, I don't know what it was, one of the Ghost Recons or the Hawks, or I don't know, some kind of only orchestral stuff, live orchestra, whatever. And he forgot. And he same guy said, Tom, man, great. Look at your career. Wow. You should just stick to the orchestral stuff. I'm like, you know what? Screw you, dude. It just is good reminders, like validation to just don't listen to what people say. It's just do what you feel you have to do. Know yourself. And
well, it really also shows how cheap talk can be, because they don't know. They like it costs somebody nothing to just throw out some advice without having any sense of where your strengths are, where your interests are, what you're itching to do. If you feel that you're at the end of one chapter and eager to open up a new chapter in your life, they have no concept of any of that. So to just go, you know what, that thing I heard of that I saw you did, that should be your path forever. My one random piece of trivia I know about you should define everything.
And it's a shame, because they don't realize that whenever we give people advice, you don't know where they are in their life or their career, and you don't know what impact that's going to have on them. I mean, that kind of rocked my world for a little bit, because this is coming from some, supposed experienced guy. And it just goes to show you should just keep your mouth shut, a lot of times, and stop dishing out advice, because you can change someone's career. You can thwart someone's career. I've seen that happen to friends of mine where, someone said at the wrong time, nah, don't do it. You shouldn't go down that direction. And that was their passion, and they should have done it. And they had it, but then they went down the safe road or whatever. And I just wish people wouldn't do that. But I just like to offer that to all of your listeners, Austin, that, if you have that passion in your heart and that desire, just friggin' stick to that, and don't care what people think.
Well, yeah, God, I couldn't agree more with that. Well, so, it's funny. I remember one of the first times, I don't actually remember when I first personally became aware of you and your work, but I think the first time I remember getting something of a deeper look at it beyond just awareness was I went to a talk you and Paul Lipson did at GDC about this game, the name of which I can't remember, but it was leveraging this experiment of Microsoft's to offload
Galactic Rain.
Galactic Rain. Yeah, it was like a space strategy game.
Yes.
And the idea was to use the cloud computing to let, like, I think that was like a mobile game, if I remember, or at least functionally could be, because it wasn't using the computer power.
That's right.
And I remember being thoroughly intrigued by the way that you had kind of built this modular music system, because the outcomes were always different. And I always found my ears perking up when I would see people really leaning into adaptive music systems. That's sort of my big obsession is the nonlinear. And so I remember seeing that and going, that was clearly a thing that you fully embraced. But hearing you talk now, coming from the record producing world, which is like the quintessential linear, like music as it has been for all time, where you can spend, like you just mentioned, days and days and days dialing in the sound of the snare on a given record, to then have to go, okay, well, wait a minute, but then the player is going to get involved and it might go 50 different directions and I have no control over the mix, potentially, those kinds of things. How was that pivot for you? I mean, you said you were a gamer, so I'm assuming you had some sense of awareness of that sort of thing, but the interactive component, how did that find you,
There was a pro and a con when it came to me kind of stepping in and being somewhat comfortable and uncomfortable. The thing I was comfortable with, surprisingly, was the fact that even in pop music, it tends to be based on circular chord progressions, right?
Sure,
so no problem. Circular chord progressions, got it. And, I can come up with things that can loop over and over and sound good. And that's very familiar. Like, here's the verse. Wait, do I want to move the verse before the bridge? Do we want it? So in that sense, it is kind of comfortable coming into the game area, because I am, and you are, in many times, using, musical blocks. You're creating blocks that can be, moved around and connected to in different ways. So that was okay. I think the thing which was more difficult for me to get my head around was the amount of variety per minute that I had to get used to putting into the music. When I heard, some of the earlier composers that were really on the forefront of this, when there were only a few people doing it, I was always taken aback and impressed by how much variety, like they would only do something for like 2 or 3 or 4 bars, and then it would change, and then it would evolve again, and it would evolve into something different. It would never do the same thing twice. Whereas in records, a lot of times it would be a simple formula. Like if you listen to any, Max Martin track, brilliant, genius, but it's like you introduce one idea and then you bring that same idea back and you just add one more thing onto it, and it's very simple, and the vocals carry the song. But when you're talking about instrumental music and score that you don't want to get old, and you kind of want to keep it fresh and immersive and stuff, you got to really keep it evolving and moving and changing. And that was more difficult, but I finally got it. But that was a different mind space. Not to mention also being a team player, coming from being the expert in the room, running the session, to now be a very small part of a team where if you love something and someone else doesn't, say goodbye to it. These kind of things. I had to get out of the artist mindset and more into the support.
Was that a hard transition? Like, did you ever sort of put your foot in your mouth as you were discovering that different vocabulary?
I think it was a challenge to my ego, in my younger years. I think it was, coming into that new dynamism or dynamic or whatever, that was a little change for me. I mean, fortunately, I navigated it well. I didn't piss anybody off. I didn't get all, prima donna on anybody, but I kind of caught myself inside being like, who does he or she think they are? That kind of stuff. When they come back with something that is completely ridiculous, you have to go down it anyway. And then sometimes you come back, you're like, yeah, you see, or you know, sometimes I started realizing that, you know what? Wow, I didn't see that. And I think that's just part of maturing. You know, I mean, I'm of the age now where, you know, yeah, sure, I'm better than I ever have been, but I feel in a way that I know less than I ever have. You know, I'm open to more things.
100%.
I'm even if I'm 100% sure of something, I could be wrong. You know, and
that was one of my most enjoyable shifts in my career. Was I think everybody has that young, hot-headed feeling of like, I'm the one who has put all my time into learning music. Let me be that expert in this crew. And the first time I was one of the very first films I worked on as a terrific director who basically said, I want to try this. And it was like every strand of DNA down to the atomic level. It was, you're wrong. You're an idiot. You're lucky to even be talking to me. And so then it was like, all right, you know what? I don't want to get fired. I'll try his thing. And flash forward, it's like 2 a.m. I'm just finishing implementing his suggestion. I'm looking at it going, God damn, if this isn't like not just a marginal improvement, this is clearly the definitive version. I mean, he knew exactly the right thing, and he didn't know how to articulate it musically, but he set me down the path, and I found a thing I would never have found on my own. And that sudden realization of, you know, these directors, you know, whether it's a film director or, you know, game director or audio director, they tend to not get into that position without some reason why. Like whether it's a great creative taste or a lot of experience, and it was such a wonderfully liberating thing to realize, oh, you know, I actually should listen to them. I should throw caution to the wind and just like let things go. But it's a funny thing how when you're like 20, it feels like, no. They're here. I have to protect the sanctity of my work as my first priority.
Yes, right. You know, I have to grace this with my brilliant music and
prevent
ideas.
them ruining it. You know,
that's right. And I think that speaks a lot to having great relationships with directors who you can trust, especially long-term relationships. When you get to that certain level, Austin, as you have, I'm sure you encounter more and more people where you can sit back and say, you know what? I never, ever would have imagined this, approaching it this way, but I'm willing to give it a shot. And I completely, you know, let's do it. Why the hell not? You know?
Actually, I would go even one step further and say I'd take great joy in being like, I would not have done this without their influence. Like, because I could, if I sat around, my general conclusion has been, I'm not creatively imaginative enough to just whole cloth keep pulling things out of nowhere. But I like going places I've never been, which means that I rely on those collaborations to go, hey, you know, here's a weird thought. What if it was like Depeche Mode meets Debussy? And I'm like, I would literally have never thought to combine those words in my head. Let's see where that goes. Like that's the point of all this, you know? So to me, the collaborations unlock all these doors that, from your point of view, it's just a flush wall. You don't even realize there's a door there. Never mind how to open it.
And it's so fun for me because I did come from in fact, it's so funny you said Depeche Mode meets Debussy. I literally did an album that can be described that way. It was all
I pulled that completely out of nowhere. You planted Depeche Mode in my head because you mentioned them a minute ago.
Right. So I literally would do adaptations. Sometimes it was original classical music, and sometimes it was a very distant one of, let's say, you know, Chopin or Prelude in G minor combined with some, you know, synthy kind of Depeche Mode dreamy thing with opera music over it. And it was incredible. And I still have, it's one of my pet projects to this day, which I hasn't seen the right outlet yet. But having that kind of fun, diverse toy box of experience that I have for, you know, since 1989, when I get to work with someone who's imaginative, you know, we sometimes turn into little kids in a sandbox. It's like, oh, wow, what about this? What about this? And, you know, I think you might also hear that in a lot of my scores. If you do, it's kind of like, wait a second, the guy who did Red Steel 1 did, I don't know, name a game. And it served me well in some cases, but in some cases, I got to be honest with you, Austin, I felt a lot of, dare I say, prejudice or judgment from a lot of the properly trained composers out there, because they don't know what to make of me. It's kind of like, wait, isn't he like some kind of like, I don't know, pop electronic guy, like whatever. And I never felt like the respect, and I'm kind of used to it. Again, you know, welcome to the world of being an outlier. But it's my life. It's who I am. And I just, you know, it leads to very interesting outcomes.
As somebody who, you know, read a lot of magazines about the world of film composers when I was growing up, this was always the thing that was sort of the defining trait of Danny Elfman's career, even to a degree to this day, where if he does anything that is sort of purely orchestral, there's always this sense of, well, who actually wrote it? Because even if it's 40 years later at this point, there's still the sense of like, yeah, but he's that Oingo Boingo guy. He's not like a proper musician. Never mind that you would have to not listen to Oingo Boingo to think they're not proper musicianship in that band.
Right.
Because it's like really interesting stuff. Like they're actually awesome. But there was always that kind of prejudice, like you said, from the classically trained, especially if anybody listening to this is not a composer and is just generally in the game development world and doesn't realize that this is a little bit of a thing that happens in the composer community. It's funny because I do have pretty classical training, but I always was so enamored of those people that came from outside that. It always felt like they had a wider lens. Classical music spends so much time teaching you decorum. It's like it's like this Jane Austen school of thought, whereas I always was way more on board with the kind of ragtag misfit style. And I think that what the conclusion I've come to, which I think is how I would explain the weird prejudice you felt, is that there are people for whom, like if you're one of those super conservatory trained types trying to size up a Tom Salta, I think a lot of those folks, they spend so much time investing in their training and not much time making music or cultivating their own voice and their own identity. And so their training becomes all they have. It's their shield. So when they see someone without that, it's like, that's how I kind of differentiate me from you. I have a special thing. The thing is, though, it's not that special. You just basically go buy it. It's right. Like this coffee cup makes me super different from you. Actually, I didn't buy this. This was swag, but well, there you go. Bad example. But you know what I mean? Like fundamentally, an education is a purchasable thing. So to hold it as this really, and you can have a super meaningful education, but to hold it as this thing that's like, it's a tool. It's a great legitimizes me, and therefore you are not, is such a projection of insecurity on the part of the judging, judgee.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that that's something that I like, that you relish the outlier thing as opposed to letting that get to you, because it's such a bullshit thing that I see it those with kind of rigorous conservatory training, they always fall into that, and it's very annoying.
Yeah.
But in any case, well, so I really want to talk about Deathloop, because this seems like the perfect like closure of all those circles, because it really feels like so here's the funny thing. That was a game that I do this podcast, a different show from this. I do this podcast with a few friends where we talk about the latest news in the game industry and that sort of thing. And I remember when Deathloop first came out, two of them were quick on it and were like, oh, you got to play this. You got to play this. And I generally really like I remember I loved Deus Ex, the Warren Spector game from 20 years ago. And like it really, that was a game that really spoke to me. And it felt like this is coming from a kind of a similar place, kind of. And I remember being very intrigued, and I loved the stylization of it, and I loved this kind of the way that it just sort of like owned a very different vibe. It wasn't some generic shooter, but I didn't really know what I was looking at. And I remember they said, "Here's the deal: you're not going to really know what you're doing with this game until you've played for like 3 or 4 hours. So don't start it until you have like a proper like half day off that you can kind of really sink your teeth into it," which was a really interesting caveat to give me, because normally I would be like, okay, I'm going to play for 20 minutes and just get a sense. In most games, you can get a sense within 20 minutes. But they were right. The funny thing was that held me off of the game forever, because I was like, I don't have 5 hours to just sit down and like that's a lot of time, but once we started chatting about doing this, I was like, all right, I really do want to. I don't want to just go listen to the album. I really want to experience the music properly. So I took that half day at some point a few months ago and was like, holy shit, this is fantastic. And so flash forward a few weeks later, I'm like 35 hours in, and I finished the game and fucking loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Great.
Great. Really, really just, yeah. And you did such a great job at, it really felt like a record, except that it's not. I mean, it very much functions as a score, and it sort of beautifully kind of tags in and out with the experience. But the whole game has that kind of in a way, the game feels like a record. It really feels like, you've got this album collection, and you're just kind of thumbing through it because there's so much agency in how things play out, even though there's a specific right and wrong.
Hello, Black Reef. Colt, my predecessor, has been pronounced guilty of treason. He is to be shot on sight henceforth in perpetuity. Your assistance is appreciated and mandatory. The real party doesn't start until he's dead.
She is not making this easy. Good morning, Black Reef. Another day, another death. Aren't time loops fun? For everyone else on this island, this place is paradise. A never-ending party where hunting me is the main attraction. And no matter how I try to escape, they always cut me down. But I'm one stubborn motherfucker. Every loop I'm learning a little more, piecing together the puzzle. There's 8 targets, and they all gotta die before midnight. There's just one little snag.
You thought it was going to be easy?
Juliana Blake, Black Reef's protector and a real pain in my ass. She may kill me 1,000,000 times, but eventually, inevitably, I will break this fucking loop.
I don't like watching you die. I like killing you. There's a difference.
But so how did this whole thing, you know, had you worked with this team before? Where did this kind of kick off? How long were you, just the basics, you know, I'm sure you've done other interviews about it, but walk me through the kind of high level bullet points of when you first clicked on, how long you were working with them, all that stuff.
Sure. Yeah. I had worked with this exact team on my work with Wolfenstein, Youngblood.
Ah, right. Yeah.
And it was Arkane. So they were the team that did the, after I had finished the main version of Youngblood, there was an offshoot of the game called Cyberpilot. It was a VR version. So I got to work with Michel, who was the audio director, who went on to move on to Deathloop. So that's how we established our rapport and our trust and mutual respect for each other. So and very different, obviously. That the Wolfenstein was a 80s, very specific 80s post-punk, Cocteau Twins 80s, synthy orchestral score. And now you got this Deathloop thing. When I got the brief and I was asked to submit my early ideas and what have you, I was a little scared because I'm like, okay, yeah, I know I'm the outlier, but oh my God, this game, talk about an outlier. Okay, you're talking about a game that they want, to be a late 60s setting. So one, most kids today don't know, you couldn't even name a track out of the late 60s. All right, so that's not really in style right now. Now, then you're talking about a game that has a time looping mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
All right, most games don't succeed at that. I mean, Majora's Mask was like that was hugely risky, and it worked out. But it was still a weird game. I mean, it was still different. I still prefer Ocarina of Time. So, and then this art style. It was like, okay, so this game, it's either going to be
also very narrative, like
failure or huge success.
And something also I want you to mention, like, I want to hear how you had to wrangle with it was the VO is a huge part of this game. Like that's essentially how all the storytelling is communicated. Your characters, Colt's kind of running monologue and or these conversations with Juliana, those kinds of things pose huge challenges to composers because you can't really pretend they're not there. But you also don't really have control over exactly when or how they're gonna. So that's another big factor.
Well, it's funny because you say that, and it's absolutely right. The dialogue is a huge part of the game. I mean, that to me, that's what really defines its personality as much as the graphics do. Is the dialogue, the voiceover, and I didn't hear the voiceover when I started. So there's a little story you might appreciate about Deathloop. The first piece of music that I created for it was what they wanted to be the main theme. And they had a very specific kind of thing they were going for. They wanted it to be like that movie kind of Mysterious Island. There's the late 60s movies, Mysterious Island, meets like Lost by Giacchino.
Was it Mysterious Island Herman? The original, like that was like the Harryhausen.
So you got Bernard Herrmann, then you got, Michael Giacchino, Lost. And so it's all this very, and I still have the theme in my head. And I was kind of proud of it in the sense that it was very different for me. I mean, imagine me doing something that is not very poppy sounding, something that definitely sounds avant-garde and very classical and didn't have the circular chord progression. It was this really interesting thing, and everyone was celebrating it and really liked it. And then about a month in, I started hearing little bits and pieces of VO. And I'm like, wait a minute. This is not the personality of this game at all. So I'm like, what do I do? They just approved like the main theme, which is going to become the source of leitmotifs and themes and melodies in the game. But I took 2 weeks because they weren't on top of me. I was already kind of moving faster than they were. So I took 2 weeks and I came up with this other, or maybe it was 1 week. I came up with this completely different idea, which was, you know, which is the same melody, just the octave higher. So it's just two little friggin' things, and the chord progression. And I put it together and I submit it to them. I'm like, Michelle, look, I know you approved the theme and everything, but here's why I think you might want to consider this. It has this certain personality. It has a little bit more pop appeal. It's more loopable. It's repeatable. It has this idea which can work very small or very big with rock drums. Like the other one doesn't seem to be able to go into all the places that this game is going. Would you consider it? And he's like, well, wow, I didn't, you know, what a surprise. Well, thank you. And he was open-minded, and he took about 2 weeks to get back to me. And he's like, you know what? You're right. This works better. But it was because of the dialogue, I think, that changed my opinion of. There's
a real irreverence to his. I don't remember the actor's name, but the guy that plays Colt in particular has a real irreverence and real kind of
Jason. Yeah, Jason. I forgot his last name, but yeah,
it's fantastic. I mean, he really. Personality really is the best word. He just oozes with it. There's a real sense of it's sort of funny, but it's also he's kind of it's not funny at his own expense. Like he's not one of those. He's not a clown, you know, or like he's genuinely trying to figure out this situation, but he's also kind of like this sarcastic, you know, a little rough around
the edges. It's like throwing Samuel Jackson into it. Like, you know, it's kind of like this interesting, very colorful personality. You love his the way he just says things.
Yeah, and the rapport with Juliana, and I could see how this like fantastical, you know, more Herman-esque thing. I cannot imagine the game with a sound like that. I did not know that story. I hadn't read any interviews or anything with you since it came out, but that truly is. I mean, does that mean that had been the plan to score the whole game that way? Like you managed to kind of pivot them onto a whole new direction, or was it just like main theme, but then, you know, like once you get into combat, maybe something that's a little bit more grooving, you know?
Yeah, it's the latter, Austin. The rest of the brief, they didn't really have too many musical examples, but they did have like instruments or sound. Like we love this baritone guitar from this, or we love the hi-hats in Bullet, you know, the late 60s television show.
I mean, Lalo Schifrin is the sound of the 60s.
Exactly. It was like Lalo so, you know, I had a hard, what they didn't really explain to me is how to capture the sound of the fight stuff, the aggressive stuff. All the stuff that they shared with me was kind of low energy and stuff. So I was like, where is the sound that I want for the aggressiveness? Where does that come from? So I took like the references that they gave me, but it wasn't spelled out. They really didn't have the rest of it spelled out, other than the era and maybe the songs that or sounds that captured certain ideas. So I went into my own vocabulary of, you know, late 60s. Okay, what did I like? And I started listening to some of the stuff again, like when I was 5 years old, whatever, you know, like Runabout from Chris Squire. And, you know, I'm going back to those days and like, oh man, I love that groove. I could hear that groove as like the background. And this is to your point where it kind of sometimes felt like it was scored like a bunch of songs that were attached to each other. I did use a lot of vocabulary from pop music of that day, but assembled it in a way that it had that element of it. But then I did tap into the Lalo Schifrin, the 60s movies as well.
Totally. No, it comes through.
Music and 60s movies, trying to blend into this mechanism that would support the different dynamics needed in the game.
I'm curious, you know, one of the things that's interesting about it, I think another reason why that approach really works is because the time loop as a justification for your character can die, but it doesn't, it's not like, oh, reload, try again in the old-fashioned video game sense. It's baked into the story, you know, like you know, a game like Hades does the same thing. When you die, the characters go, well, that sucked. I guess you better get better, or what? Like they narrativize the death and sort of resurrection, which takes the teeth off of it. It makes it so death is now this frustrating annoyance. It's not existential, literal life and death.
Yeah,
and
it's like, oh, damn it.
Yeah, like, not again.
I gotta do it again. Yes, it's great.
And I think that this sort of big melodramatic orchestral thing would have made it too serious. It would have made it feel too like, I just died, holy shit. But it's like, god damn, you know, like, and I think that it just does wonders for the tone as connects to the actual mechanics of how the narrative worked. One thing I was curious about, I didn't really pick up on this. I confess, I just got so absorbed in the game at some point, I found myself not really analyzing how the score worked. But because there's so many different variables to the game, I found myself curious. This was a thing where you could have gotten nightmarishly complicated and really quickly. And so you would have had to draw the line somewhere, I would think. So I'm curious, for example, every location can be visited at one of 4 different times of day. And they can also be visited relative to others. Like you can go to this location second, having come from this, and that has narrative implications because obviously that's the kind of lattice work that you're building in order to figure out how to break the loop. And I was curious if the score is responding to any of that kind of thing, if it's more location based, if there's a time of day aspect to it. There's so many things that you could be plugged into theoretically, but it also would mean that you could easily have like 1,000 hours of score if you're not careful. So
that's right.
How did that all shake out?
So it was a combination of necessary limitations due to the budget and time. I mean, they approached me, quite frankly. I think the scope was like 25 minutes of music. I'm like,
whoa,
what? Come on.
That's like, you need 10 times that, I would think.
25 minutes. How am I, you know? So it forced, those limitations forced me to kind of reconsider certain approaches. But again, it's like, why does this happen to me? You know, why? When am I going to get the 2-hour score that I get 2 years to do? You know, I get the you know.
I mean, how much did that number stick? I mean, it felt like there was way more than that.
Well, there ended up being more than that, but it was done in a way which didn't necessarily benefit the composer so much as it did. I strategically. Okay, so this is the way it works. Every area has its own suite. Okay, now what I mean by a suite is it goes from the lowest to the highest intensity. So everything from exploration to heightened tension to a fight to you running away.
Right.
All right, that's a suite. And every area that you're referring to, the upper city, which is called Updom, and you know, all the different areas, the satellite area, the whatever, they all had their own suite. But then every visionary that you had to assassinate also had their own suite.
Right.
As well. So it gave them the flexibility to switch from an area suite into a character suite.
Right, I see.
Now, the way I approached the times of day was as follows. And originally they said, oh, well, you know, well, actually, it was funny. They wanted me to, for all the characters, I think there was 9, they wanted me to have the same piece of music, but then just switch out one instrument.
Right.
Like, you know, with Charlie, just have a trumpet, or with someone else, have a saxophone or some. And I'm like, that's going to get old, you know? So I kind of over-delivered on that sense, whereas sometimes I did, and I did follow the same time signature and tempo and key and general structure, but I replaced a lot more than just a single instrument. But there is similarity between all the characters. There is similarities. It's following it's plugged into the same shell. For the areas, it had the same music for different times of day, but different arrangements of it. So what I would do is in short, I would throw in the kitchen sink, knowing that I was going to now divide it up.
Back, yeah.
I was going to say, okay, this feels more like morning. So let me approach this with the tremolo strings and maybe just a light light vibraphone, or, you know, so I would say, oh, this sounds like morning. okay, let me mute that. Now, what do I got in here? What sounds like the afternoon? You know, and then, you know, knowing that in the evening they wanted it to be a little bit more up and people are getting ready to party. So that's when I brought in the drums and like, okay, the drummer, now you come out on stage. So I would do different arrangements. I did 4 distinctly different arrangements of the exploration area music for every map. But the combat was the same. The combat had just regular combat and then over the top combat.
Yeah.
So that's how we were able to sort of make it 25, but it wasn't. The soundtrack is over an hour. If you go out on Spotify right now, it's over an hour, and you can listen to it. It doesn't get old, even though.
Does that mean some of that is done through editorial? In other words, like some of that is taking exactly those things you said, and I've done that trick a million times, where you go 2 minutes that stack vertically can easily make an 8-minute track on an album that never really repeats itself. I mean, that's kind of how games are done.
Yeah, it is. And, you know, there's a limit where it's like, I'm getting screwed here versus, okay, that's not too bad. I understand how it works. And
I've done that. I love that thinking. And I've certainly done versions of that in the past where they go, well, here's like, I've been lucky where sometimes I work on a project and they go, okay, we're thinking, you know, this many, whatever, however many minutes. And I'll go, well, you know, I really think it's going to need more. And if I just go beyond that, is that going to raise any alarm bells? And they're kind of like, I mean, look, it's sort of your loss at that point for working beyond what's on paper. So I guess knock yourself out. But then I've worked with others where, you know, the more rigorously legally codified departments are like, you'll be breaching contract if you go past that amount. Like we really can't accept more. So then you go, okay, so what if it's just like 50 layers deep and it can be remixed 1,000 ways? It's just a 2-minute loop. I don't know what you're talking about.
Wow.
And you know, and then it gets over the line, but then you actually have a lot of content that you can leverage. Because sometimes, you know, companies will just go, you know, we really, this is how many we're greenlit for. We have mandatory protocols. It's not, we appreciate you wanting to support it more, but we can't accept more than we are paying you for without paying you for more. And we're not going to go over budget. So it's like, you know, there's workarounds that I have found. Like, I get it. It's actually, we should be grateful that they're not like letting us sort of be taken advantage of in that way. But sometimes the game just needs more, you know? And
sometimes
it's just,
I have been taken advantage of, unfortunately, in some of those ways, because I thought it would lead to new opportunities. And it did, without naming names. Some of them I did over deliver. And then the next one that I got, they ended up hiring me for what I over delivered on the first one. You know, because sometimes it's ridiculously low, like, you know, 20 minutes for a game that takes you 20 hours to play or even less. And I'm like, come on, are you serious? You can't, you know,
it's wild.
So, but it, you know, it's par for the course in some ways. And you got to know where the limits are. Are we talking unique material versus variations? How long does it honestly take me? I mean, you know, and I find that most clients, you know, are fair when it comes to that.
A minute ago when you said, you know, I want to do 2 hours of music that I spent a couple years writing and all that, that made me realize, how long were you working on this then? Like that implies much less.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. I came in, toward the end. I mean, I did sort of have more time than I usually. I think it was 4 months.
That's more than normal for you.
That's much more than normal.
Wow, you really are an outlier, because one of the things that seems to constantly, every composer I talk to, especially anybody that's also worked in film, they always talk about how amazing it is to just have so much more time. I mean, I've done 1 or 2 jobs personally that were like 1 month turnaround or whatever, but the overwhelming majority have been 2 years, 3 years, 4 years.
Really?
And so
I wish. I mean, I never see
wild as a norm.
It gives you so much. I mean, right? Where you can. I mean, I loved your scores and journey, and I've read so many of the stories. Like when I first discovered you, and I remember hearing about the time that you had to work on it. I'm like, wow, that's incredible. They gave me 6 weeks to score Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter 2 from scratch, 20-minute score with a live orchestra, 6 weeks. Now, I mean, some film composers might laugh at that. They're like, ha, you know, I have to score a whole episode of whatever, 20 minutes a week. But
yeah,
that's different. It's a little bit more of a cookie cutter kind of rinse and repeat
machine there for sure.
You know, but I am working on a game now, which has been giving me a lot more time, which is wonderful. In fact, they had to put me on hiatus because they went back to update some things. Let's put it that way. But normally I don't get a lot of time.
Yeah, that is, I mean, I think I get it, like a Just Dance situation where it's a very specific brief on what they need. And it's also going to be like a 2-minute or a 3-minute or 4-minute song or whatever. I get if they go, can you have it next week or whatever, or 2 weeks or that to me, that feels about right. But a full score, I'm amazed that Ghost Recon gig was that short.
Yeah, that was crazy.
That's really, well, I can say having a lot of time can be a blessing. And I've really come to appreciate being able to throw things out and start again and just blank page multiple times through a process and just literally jettison everything and go, I'm going to start again and just see where it takes me. And if I decide it's not working, I guess I can go back to the direction I was in before. But like the number of times that I remember like on Abzu, I think it was something like for every 5 minutes of music that made it a game, there was close to 40 minutes that I threw away, something like that. Like I would write huge amounts of material and then go, nah, I don't like it, and just get rid of it because we had years to go, and the game's scope wasn't that. The score in the end was about an hour, so it wasn't like huge. It wasn't like some Skyrim like 12 hours of music sort of thing. And so, that was obviously very lucky. And that was all self-propelled. They weren't breathing down my neck asking for a bunch of changes. I just loved the game and was like, I think I could do better.
Wow.
But I will say it can also be a curse. You get decision paralysis when suddenly you realize anything's possible. I can blank page it. There's a real liberation in going, I got a week. I cannot sit here and question myself. I feel like you've probably surely just mastered that. You probably work really fast. I would think. Yeah.
And I've come to this this observation over my career of this process that happens. And I remember Chance Thomas asked me years ago, he's like, could you share like your creative process for his book, like in a few paragraphs? And it led me to a whole nother self-propelled observation where I journaled one of my games from beginning to end, where I like just got hired.
Oh, that's great.
All the way to the delivery. And I journaled out like every day what I was doing.
Which game was it?
And it was Halo Spartan Strike, I believe. Was it Spartan Strike or Spartan Assault? I think it was Spartan Strike. I think it was one of the Halo games. And it caused me to create what I call now the creative process, and I've put this together in a presentation. I've taught this and I've shared it with others, and it broke it down into these 5 phases, and also on a timeline, which really helps me because I realize that the most important phases for me, which we tend to skip when we are worried or rushed or panicked, is the experimentation phase, what I call the R&D phase.
I use that same term.
You know, and when you have that time, you naturally go through it because like I don't have to start this. I could just let me just listen to, let me bathe in some scores of composer XYZ or whatever, or watch these movies, and it just helps you kind of study and absorb. And you know, someone in my position who's on a deadline, like a shorter deadline, often feels like they got to click into the composing phase. Like, okay, I got 30 minutes and I got a month. So that means 1 minute a day. And if I'm not doing that from day one, I'm screwed. Yeah. And I realize that's not the way it really should work. And I discovered that really the most valuable things happen when I'm not composing. which is at the beginning. And I have a chart called the creativity potential line, which kind of starts up high and it goes down.
Right.
And what I find is that
you're like narrowing your options as you go.
Because you go more from creating ideas which you can afford to throw away to the point where you have to start manufacturing and assembling the music. At least I do, because it's like, okay, now it's like, oh, no, we got to plug this in. All right, we already have this motif. And now we got to come up with another combat cue and another. And it becomes more of this less creative, crank out the music, boilerplate stuff. But that's where the scores lose their soul and their spirit. And perhaps, you know, that's why so much of your work that I've heard has had such unique soul and spirit. I'm like, oh, my God, listen to that. It's like, I would have never come up with that if, you know, even if I had the same exact style and brain you did, I wouldn't have come up with that if I only had to do it in a month. You know?
100%. That R&D phase is everything. That idea of letting things kind of simmer, because I definitely think it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking it's a form of procrastination to go, let's wait to the end to like pump it all out. But if you're on low heat and sort of marshaling your creative forces, then you can end up in a unique place and then machine gun out all those ideas.
Because then you have the ammo. So yeah, so for me, it's like, you know, phase 1 is R&D. Phase 2 is dipping the toe into the water. Literally, like I give myself permission to just try a few, you know, take some of the important moments and see if some of those 20, 40 ideas that I created from R&D, just playing around, not worrying if it mattered or not. Maybe I have some great ideas, and that usually happens. Some of my best ideas came from there, but they were lost in a pile of, you know, 50 other ideas, but that's okay.
Yep.
Because I had that time to experiment, trial and error, and it was fine. That's great. And then by the time I get to phase 3, which is starting to get to the meat of things, it's like, I got some great shit I can pull from. Now I'm like, I got it. And, you know, then by the time it's like, so it really works. And that's how I can work on a deadline, whether it's 2 weeks, 2 years. I still take that same formula and I just spread it out.
Yep. Yeah, no, totally.
You know what I mean?
What's phase 4 then? If 3 is
so phase 3 is getting to the meat of it. Phase 4 is a lot of the let's say the patching, making sure that everything is covered and making sure
clean up
your first full prototype. Is this all working? Is everything working? Do I have to make any adjustments or tweaks? But by the time I get to phase 4, I'm not composing anymore.
Right.
You know, I'm not making any new ideas, any new themes. I mean, of course, it sometimes happens, but on the general rule, I don't do that, and I don't plan on it, and I don't set myself up for failure that way. So it's a bit more of a.
It's like an editorial
observation, really. It's nice because it kind of takes the anxiety away.
Yeah.
Like, because you start to say like, no, I'm cool. I can this is fine. And it
would
works.
you consider those 4 phases to be a process that how to phrase this? Is it something where you go, if I want to deliver to the best of my abilities, these are the stages I will go through? Or is it more like, this tends to be how it shakes out? Like, in other words, how, if someone were to come at you and go, I want to work a totally different way than what you're used to, and they were to spell out something that is not really compatible with, like, okay, here's an example. Darren Korb told me that he basically will sit down and write, like doing a game like Hades, he'll come up with essentially a track that's going to attach to a specific part of the game, and he'll fully start to finish produce this piece of music, and then it goes in, and then he moves on, and it's not like a base coat of paint across the whole game, and then another coat of paint, which tends to be more how I work, and it sounds more like how you're working, where, you know, okay, high-level themes, high-level aesthetics, creative direction, what's the approach, what's the kind of soul of this thing, and then letting the kind of water trickle down into the deeper layers until eventually now you're just executing. He tends to do like these slices, take them to completion, and then move on. And nothing can ever then retroactively change that, with rare exception. Like, would that appeal to you? In other words, how immovable or not is your process, would you say?
Yeah. Yeah, well, the good news about this process is it removes a lot of backpedaling. So when I do create a piece that, let's say even with, Deathloop, I remember the first suite I did was Updom. And when in going through the process, I did use the same process. It's, that 5-stage creative process. But what it enabled me to do is, by the time that I got to the point where I was creating a piece of music and here's my suite, I had already done all the homework and all of the R&D and experimentation and research and sound mining and custom musical recipes and all these things that I try to put into every project. That was already established. So what happens is I do that, but it happens a little bit later. It didn't happen in the first few weeks I was working on it, because I was going through my process, which is kind of getting geared up to do it. And then when I do it, it's like I go forward, and I don't generally have to kind of go back and give it a new coat of paint. That being said, Austin, sure, there are times where you find that magic fairy dust element that you might want to go back on and apply to some other things, which did happen in Deathloop. Some of that was post-production. So, for example, some of the ways I mixed things, I started putting very subtle wobbling of the pitch into some of the instruments, where it kind of almost felt like a warped vinyl or a cassette. And when I started doing that in some of the later tracks, the music director was like, "Oh my God, I love this sound. Could you?" And I'm like, "Really, really?" Okay. So I said, if I have time, I'm going to try to go back and maybe get that little coat of paint to some of the other things, like including the main theme. But that's rarely the case, because normally I don't have time to go back, because I don't have those long schedules. But what I'm talking about is really the creative process, not as much as the production process, which can kind of say, okay, now I'm gonna go back and make sure that this sounds compatible with this and this sounds, but more often than not, I don't revisit things. I kind of finish it and move on, but I've already established the consistency factor.
Right. Yeah.
Throughout everything.
In this case, it really did all seem to pan out and pay off, because the game, I just really loved the game. I was really surprised how much it kind of got under my skin, and you did such a fantastic job of sort of, I sort of say slotting in with the personality, but I think that actually between you and the actor, you really are the two main sources of that personality. So it's not like you're grafting onto a thing that existed sort of somehow independent of that. I think you're a big part of where that personality comes from. So endless kudos, man, because it's just it's just fantastic. Well, to close this out, as we started, you teased that you have some things on the horizon that you're not actually forbidden from getting into, and I would be remiss not to actually have that rare treat.
Ask me. Come on, ask me what game I'm working on, Austin.
Yeah, exactly. So what's
God,
what's coming down the pipe?
And again, this might be out of left field for a lot of people, but I'm finally getting the chance to score what I consider my first true proper horror game, called Outlast Trials. And so this is a terrifying franchise that's been established. There's already 2 games, Outlast 1 and 2, but Outlast Trials is taking that and taking it to a whole nother level. Because it's also adding the option for multiple players to cooperate. And one of the things that made Outlast Trials so unique and horrifying, I knew about this game before I even knew what the name was. I mean, years ago, I remember someone saying, "Look, you got to check this out. This is the scariest thing you've ever."
I've never played. I've heard.
You can't fight back.
These are familiar franchise. When was the
I don't remember when it came out, but it was years ago.
Yeah,
the thing that made it unique is you couldn't fight back.
Yeah,
you had to get out and hide. Like you literally had to like crawl under a bed or in a locker and hope that they don't come in and duck their head under the bed. I mean, it's terrifying the way they do it. It's so cinematic.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God, like jumps. It's like, oh man. So you hear people screaming, like if you watch playthroughs, it's so satisfying. And this is great for me because when I was a little kid, back to the 5-year-old, I was fascinated with haunted houses. I would build haunted houses in my house. My parents would crawl through. I'd put blankets and chairs. And then I would, as I got a little older, I had my cassette tape and I would record scary music off TV. And then as I got older and older in my 20s, I made haunted houses. We'd hire actors. I'd build mazes, props, lights, and I would score my own music to it. So this is literally a dream come true. And it's a video game and it's going to be the score, the theme is already written. In fact, it's out there on YouTube for people to hear. There's a making of the music. So this is a rare thing. Like people are actually able to see it coming together. And I still have half of the score to go. And I couldn't be more excited because it's like, I don't want it to end because I'm doing all this aleatoric, you remember, Jason Graves' incredible score,
Dead Space,
right?
Legendary, yeah.
Oh my God, the Dead Space. So this, in many ways, it's as terrifying as that, but it's a completely different setting and game. It takes place in the late 50s in a kind of an insane asylum experimental kind of thing where you get you volunteer, you sign up almost like you're getting drafted, and then they throw a burlap bag over your head. They drill goggles into your face, and you wake up in this experiment where where you have to kind of go through it involuntarily. It's horrifying. It truly is.
So have they said when this is coming out, or like when you expect to?
Yeah, so it has changed. It has changed, but right now the current thinking, I believe, is this fall. I'm aiming. I can't officially say because things do change, but I would imagine that Halloween would be a key point.
That would be a good window
for whether it be an early access or who knows, but I believe this fall fans could look forward to something exciting.
Well, if you're halfway to go, that means you could potentially have a busy few months.
I hope so. Yeah, I think so.
Bring it to the finish line.
I had to take a break, but I'm just starting now, and on the rest of it, I've already done half of it.
Yeah.
So
well, that's exciting. Yeah. I definitely have never heard a kind of like visceral, violent horror side of you. Right. And that feels like a very intriguing. It's funny because, this whole concept of sort of pigeonholing. I remember when Jason, speaking of horror, when he got approached, or I think it was actually, I think he was submitting on that game called Moss.
Yes.
And I remember, I think he told me the story where his agent called them and said, "What do you think of Jason?" And they go, "Oh, it's not that kind of game." Because it's not a horror game. And it was like, well, he has heard of like C major and D major. These are tools actually he has at his disposal.
Go figure.
Yeah. The exact, reverse, like this doesn't have to be some synthy sort of drum and bass grooving sort of. It turns out Tom Salta actually has heard of aleatory and sort of clashing or whatever kind of techniques.
Can you believe this? It's amazing. So
has there been anything on the, I'm going to go watch your video that you said is out there about the music, but in the meantime, is there anything in there that you've tried that you kind of always wanted to, but never had the right game for it that you've been able to finally kind of throw in? What would be an example of that?
Absolutely. It's two examples of that. One would be the theme. The theme itself, it's very rare. Think about this, Austin. This is an observation I was making. Think about some of the most iconic themes now of melodic themes, not like Psycho, but like think of some of the horror movies that we all know that when you go to the store and you buy a Halloween CD and the Halloween themes, what are you going to hear? you're gonna hear what, you know, the movie
Yeah,
Halloween,
say The Exorcist, yeah, like
The Exorcist, which is tubular bells, right?
Yep.
But if you listen to that music out of context of the movie, it's not really that scary.
No, for sure.
I mean, tubular bells, it's kind of beautiful.
100%. It's literally only creepy because people associate it with this incredibly creepy movie.
Right. So my goal for Outlast was to make something that had the memorability, is that the word? Yeah. of a tubular bells or a Halloween, but was actually terrifying. And it also is a bit longer because besides it does have the motif, which I won't spoil for you, but it does have the simple, like I also wanted something that would be simple for someone to play on a piano, but also could have more depth and could be expanded, where now we're getting into some deeper dissonant kind of, I don't know whether it's Prokofiev or Bartok, I don't know, but you know, but like this very like little crazy kooky stuff, but then it gets into, you know, full out bombastic, oh my God. And it kind of takes you on this journey. So the theme is like a melodic, terrifying on its own, but memorable theme. That was the goal. So that's something I never did before. And then the other thing I never did before was a score like Dead Space, where a lot of the mechanism, sometimes, not always, can be just aleatoric, wavery, terrifying sounds and textures that begin to build and just create a soundscape for you, rather than, you know, just scory kind of stuff, like melodic
loops that we talked about.
Yeah, but it also is hybrid in the sense that it's not just based on orchestral, like Dead Space. I love this, one of my most terrifying scores I've ever heard in games, but it was mainly orchestral sourced.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whereas this one is going to have orchestral, but it's more hybrid. Some of it allowed me to go and be, you know, Trent Reznor, and I can get into some experimental stuff and break out some modular.
Yeah, right. Very industrial and grungy and.
Yeah, so exactly. So, but it has organicness, but it also has industrialness as well, and orchestral. So it's kind of like, yay, you know, talk about back full circle to that creative freedom. This is something that I look forward to fully completing, and maybe get lucky enough to speak to you next year about.
Yeah, man. That's exciting. I'll definitely go watch the video that they already released. I see that on the Red Barrels channel. Look, man, this has been very, very, I appreciate you indulging all my questions. It's very exciting to just kind of hear your incredibly atypical path. And I mean, you know, one of the things that is, like I kind of mentioned this a little while ago, but it's such a recurring thread that people have such disparate backgrounds. Their careers tend to zig and zag. Whenever I meet young composers, one of the things I'm always trying to suss out is what's your thing? What makes you you that's not interchangeable with everybody else? Because what you'll find is when you talk to the people that have managed to stay in the game for decades, they always have, in many cases, multiple things that make them them, that you just can't go find from other folks. And you're just the latest example of living proof of that. So hopefully anyone who listens to this takes a lot of the big picture takeaways that you've tapped into to heart, because it's some really great stuff.
Thank you. I would encourage all of your listeners, particularly young ones starting out, you know, don't rush to just genericize your sound and learn what everyone else is doing. Take advantage of this early time in your career where you have no life demands that you have to, you know, meet a certain criteria of whether it's income or certain things you're doing. Take that time to discover your musical identity. What is it that you really love to do? And a lot of that is it's a jump into the dark. It's scary because you might come out with something that you might not think is very marketable or appealing, but you know what? It will play into making you a unique composer and have a unique sound, and you never know where it's going to be needed and come out. So I say embrace that uniqueness as early as you can.
I'm gonna let that be the last word. It's a perfect place to end it.